Today we're going to be looking at simple interest. Simple interest is the interest that is based on a fixed percentage of an original amount that has been invested or borrowed. In these examples, we are going to be using this simple interest formula, where I equals the amount of interest in dollars, P is the principal amount, or the amount that's originally invested or borrowed, R is the interest rate per time period. Sometimes it may need to be recalculated if it's for per month or per year, depending on the question. And lastly, N is the number of time periods. So that will also be indicated in the questions. We're going to go through a few examples where we use this formula. The first example says to calculate the amount of simple interest earned on an investment of $4,450 that returns 6.6 per annum for 3 years. Per annum means per year, and we also have 3 years, so we don't need to recalculate any of those amounts. But looking at our question, we can already see that first I've got my principal, which is $4,450. I have the rate, which is 6.5, and lastly I have T, which is 3. So right now I've been able to get all these values straight from the question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute those values back into our simple interest formula. So I equals 4,450 times 6.5 times 3, all divided by 100. So make sure that if you are putting this into your calculator, that you put all of the values that are in the numerator first and press equals and then divide by 100. And you should get 867.75. So the simple interest that is earned here is calculated to be $867.75. In this example, it says how much interest is paid on a monthly balance of $665 with a simple interest rate of 7.2% per annum. Now I've already noticed that we've got our principal rate, so that's 665, and we've also got a rate here that is 7.2%. However, we're looking at the question, it says monthly, whereas our interest rate is per annum, so per year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this 7.2 by 12 to get a monthly rate, and that would equal 0.6. And lastly, our time period equals 1 because we're just looking at 1 year. So my interest, so all I'm going to do now is substitute these values back into our original formula. So P is 665, R is 0.6, and T equals 1, all divided by 100. And if I put that into the calculator, I've got 3.99. So the interest that will be paid will be $3.99. So it's important to check the values as well as the time period and see if you may need to readjust some of those values. Sometimes in the questions, they'll ask you to use simple interest, but they'll ask you to either calculate principal, the rate, or the time, and not the interest at all. In that case, what I've done here is rearrange the formula. So in this one, if you wanted to calculate time, you would use this formula. If you wanted to calculate the rate, you would use this formula. And lastly, if you wanted to calculate the principal, you would use this formula. So let's have a look at an example below. It says, how long will it take an investment of $2,500 to earn $1,100 with a simple interest of 5.5% per annum? So you can see in the question here, it actually says how long, which means we're needing to find T. And in our question, we can see that we've got P equals 2,500. I have my interest is 1,100, and my rate is 5.5. So it's important to check what are the values that you already know from the question, but also how the question's written to figure out what you're wanting to calculate. So if I wanted to find T, then we're definitely going to be using this formula here. So T equals 100 times I divided by PR. So we're now going to substitute those values back into this formula. So t equals 100 times I, which is 1,100, all divided by 2,500 times 5.5. And if I put that through the calculator, I'm going to do the numerator, which will get to 110,000 divided by 13,750. And if I divided that, it would be 8. So it would take 8 years, because our value here was per annum, and we know that T is in terms of years, for the investment to earn 2,500. We can also use simple interest to find compound interest. Compound interest is calculated as a percentage of an amount that is also invested or borrowed. The difference, however, between compound interest and simple interest is that compound interest earns interest on the interest, and it keeps adding for the time period. The steps that we're going to use is first to identify the principal, the interest, and the compounding period. Second, we're going to calculate the interest for the first compounding year. We're then going to add that interest to the principal, and now this becomes the new principal. And we keep doing that for as many compounding periods that is written in the question. We're going to go through an example now. So in this example, it says a person invests $5,000 in a financial institution at 6% per annum compounded annually. Calculate the value of the investment after 3 years using this simple interest formula. So the first thing we're going to do is find the different values in our formula, in our question. So here I can see that I've got 5,000, which is my principal, so P equals 5,000. I then have my rate, which is 6%, so 6. And I also have my time period here, which at the moment is only going to be 1. But we're going to do this 3 times because we want to know what it is over 3 years. So we're going to look at the first year, and that's why we put T equals 1 and not 3. So the first thing we're going to do is substitute those values into the simple interest formula. So we have I equals 5,000 times 6 times 1 divided by 100. And if I did that in the calculator, I would get 300. So this now becomes my new principal. But first we've got to add it. We've got to add it to our original principal. So new principal is 5,000 plus 300. So my new principal, is $5,300. So we're now going to use this to now calculate the second year. We can do that here. So we're going to use the same formula, however the principal is now 5,300 times 6 times 1 again, because nothing else changes, all divided by 100. And if I put that through the calculator, we should get 318. So we now need to re-add that back to our principal that we just had before, so to get the new principal. So as you can see, we can use the simple interest formula to keep adding as we go. So the last time was 5,300 plus 318. And I got the 5,300 from here. And that will equal 5,618. So this is our new principal going into the third year. So we're going to go through this process again, but we're going to use our new principal going into the new year. So again, we have I equals 5,618 times 6 times 1. Remember, nothing changes except for that principal amount. And then that would be 337.08. So the new principal here, or even I should say the final principal, because we have now gone through the 3 years, is going to be what we found here, which was 5,618 plus the interest we've just earned in the third year, which will give me 5,955 and 8 cents. So as you can see, what we're doing is we're using the simple interest formula and we're adding the interest as we go. So we looked at the first year and we found the interest. We then added it to our original amount. We then went into the second year with our new amount and we found our interest, and then we add it again. And then we find our last amount for our final year and we find the interest for that last year and we add it along. So what we're doing is we're adding the interest each time, but the interest is now being calculated by the new amount or the new principal. So this is how we can use simple interest to be able to find compound interest. It is a bit of a process, but it's important to look at a few things. So firstly, make sure that you find your principal, your interest rate, and then also the compounding period. That will tell you how many times to repeat that process. And lastly, do not forget to always be calculating your new interest before you recalculate that interest.